Alright, so it's been a little while since I've actually put together one of these, how this genetics thing works. I think 145 was the last version I put one out for, and enough has changed that I feel like I should probably go through it again. Um, Most of the config stuff from 145 is still the same though. I mean, if it existed in 145, it still exists in almost exactly the same format here. I just feel like I need to really explain how the rapid mutation mode works and actually use a diagram to kind of show how the general system works. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to talk about the whole generic mode versus specific mode. I'm just going to talk about just general the flow. So whenever you start a run, there is a master template that is created. This doesn't always have to happen right when the run starts. If you're in specific mode, it'll happen when the first of whatever that monster type is spawns. So if the first Lemurian hasn't spawned yet, there probably won't be a Lemurian master. But as soon as it does, it'll create a brand new master with default values for all of its stats. 1.0. Then, when every individual Lemurian spawns, it'll start with an empty template. In reality, it'll actually start with a copy of its master, but I'm saying it's going to start empty because it helps show the flow. So the first thing it does is it grabs an exact copy of its master. Whatever's in here, it takes an exact copy of that and starts going. As soon as it has that done, it'll generate a random mutation. This is usually a very small step in some random direction. As you can see, some of these are a little bit higher, some of them are a little bit lower, but nothing more than like 10%. And these limits can be set in the config, the max and min can be set in the config, but I believe I go over that in the 145 video, so I'm not going to re-explain here. Once it has these stats, it actually applies it to the monster. The monster is now alive, and it can start going about its life. Every time it does damage to you, it earns some points, and eventually the monster will either die, or you will go to the next stage and the monster will, quote unquote, die because it doesn't exist anymore. Once that happens, it gets put in this kind of collection of dead monsters that haven't been processed yet. And every 10 seconds, the masters, all of them, will come through and look for things that belong to them. So the Lemurian master will come through and pick up all the Lemurians and figure out what worked well and maybe a little bit of why that worked well. And so as you can see, it learned that, health is good, regen's kind of not great, and so on and so forth. It'll start to look like its children. And this happens every 10 seconds. That can be configured, but 10 seconds is a pretty safe value to go with. And then once it's been processed, it's discarded. We don't want to count dead monsters from multiple separate generations, multiple times. Otherwise, you're going to get, monsters from the very start of the game counting at like stage 3. And you don't want that because you want them to actually learn. So once they learn, you just repeat the cycle. This replaces this old one, and we enter generation 2. You come in, you take these values, and these have been moved over here. So this new monster that spawns grabs a copy of this guy. Probably not easy to see my mouse. That's kind of unfortunate. I'll do this tool, might make it a bit more visible. But yeah, anyways, the second generation comes around, and you grab a copy of these, bring them over, mutate, earn points, die, go back, and get learned from. And this happens every 10 seconds while the artifact is enabled, and that's generally how the learning system goes. Again, the 145 video explains this in a bit better detail, but I just want to explain the kind of general flow here. What is new in 2.4.0 is something called the rapid mutation mode. If I actually pull up the code here, I believe it's under section 5, master optional settings. Yeah, and you can set that to either never be active, always be active, only events, which means it only happens when the teleporter is active or if you're in the void cells and you open one of the vents. Only the moon, which technically isn't true. It'll happen on the moon and on the a moment fractured or a moment whole, whichever one the corrupted scavenger is on. It'll happen there. And then events and moon, which is just both of these combined at the same time. It'll happen during teleporters and on the moon. And these moon ones were added simply to give Mithrix kind of the ability to mutate. Otherwise, he doesn't ever really get the chance to change. And if I go back to this here, so what rapid mutation is that it's fundamentally the same thing. You know, you come in, grab a copy, and when you die, you get learned from. But the difference is, instead of mutating just once and then going about your life, you mutate once, become alive, and then every second that you're alive, you're going to mutate again. And so, you know, this happens every second that it's alive. It doesn't actually learn anything from this. You know, it doesn't go over here and say, okay, what did I learn? Okay, cool, come back. What did I learn? Come back. No, it just keeps making random guesses every second until it dies. And so you can end up with values that are significantly different from what you started with. And you can get values well outside of the normal bounds, you know? You can get, so like you come in here with like a 1.02, and actually wait, let's disable that layer. Ah, yes, I had those layers overlapping. So you come in with a 1, you know, you might get this 10% higher, and then all of a sudden you're now 5% lower. Or you can come in and you're like 5% higher, and now you're 34% higher, you know, because they can stack. Because they don't really care about what master thinks. They just keep going. They keep, every second they learn. They don't learn. They keep guessing every second. And eventually when they die, they might look completely different than what they started out as. Some of them might be the same. Size tends to be a little bit stubborn if you have that enabled. And health is a little tricky because health doesn't ever look like it changes, but it can. You won't notice health changing with this active unless it's a monster that automatically has regeneration. But I think the only monsters that this would apply to are those little mushroom things. They might actually have a noticeable change in health. But for the most part, you're not going to see the health change. You might see the move speed, damage, and attack speed changes, but you're probably not going to see the rest of them because they don't apply to a lot of the monsters. And then, of course, the same thing happens when they die. They get learned from every 10 seconds and discarded. And, you know, rinse and repeat until the rapid mutation mode is disabled, whether that means clearing the teleporter or clearing the moon. So yeah, that's just a real quick overview of what was added in 2.4.0. I felt like I should probably actually go over this again. And yeah, that's it.